Oh, hello there. Welcome to the first and last edition of Basement Notes, brought to you here live in room 101.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
This week's topic is 1984 by George Orwell. The main character of 1984 is Winston. Winston is a pretty solitary dude, and he seems kind of weak in the beginning of the novel. But he has one strong attribute to him that shows a lot of courage, and that's his defiance towards Big Brother. Defying Big Brother basically is something that you don't do in this totalitarian society, but Winston chooses to. One day, Winston takes to his journal and writes about his hatred for Big Brother. This is a very courageous act. Winston, after this, just becomes nervous and paranoid that he's going to be killed for, lashing out against Big Brother in such a secretive way. But then he goes along to meet up with Julia and O'Brien, who seem to be two people that could get him into even more trouble. Julius becomes more of a sexual partner for the rest of the novel, and is a sense of freedom for Winston. O'Brien, on the other hand, becomes more of an intellectual item. O'Brien soon has Julia and Winston over to his house, where he shuts off his telescreen. This is a very renegade idea to Julia and Winston. When Julia and Winston are there, they are also given a copy of the Brotherhood's manifesto by Goldstein. Goldstein is the enemy of the totalitarian state. Following this, Winston and Julia go up to a shop in the Paroles area, and they begin living in a small upstairs apartment. Little do they know that the person that is running that apartment is part of the Thought Police. Not only is he part of the Thought Police, but O'Brien is part of the Thought Police. And with these two, they manage to peg Winston and Julia. Upon their capture, Winston and Julia are sent to the Ministry of Love. Presumably, they're in the bottom of the Ministry of Love, which is one of the massive pyramids that are found in this city. While they're there, both of them are presumably tortured, although we know O'Brien is tortured. We know O'Brien tortures Winston. And a lot of, very terrible things are done to him. But nothing is as bad as when O'Brien finally takes Winston to room 101. When in room 101, O'Brien puts a cage full of rats on Winston's face. He tells Winston that he's going to open the gate, and the rats will come up and eat his face, which is a pretty bad idea. But before he can do that, Winston wishes it to happen to Julia. And at this time, O'Brien removes the cage, and Winston is released, because he has denounced any love that he has for Julia by wishing this pain upon her. Later on, at the end of the novel, Julia and Winston finally meet up again. And when they finally meet up, they realize that they've both sold each other out, and there really is no love between them, and their relationship basically is over. And then at the very end, Winston is sitting in a small cafe, watching the telescreen and wishing the best for Big Brother. And at this point, we know that Winston's soul has been taken away and just replaced with Big Brother. And now for the analysis portion of our program. We'll begin with analyzing Winston. Winston is not seen as your typical storybook hero. He's not big, strong, fast, just an amazing person, or, terribly strong. But rather, Winston is described as very average. I mean, he's given average looks, he's an average person, he does an average job, and he lives an average role. But the difference with Winston is that he does have very courageous acts. He does act out against Big Brother and, try to change the world around him, even though it's not a widely accepted view. Now, another issue with Winston is that he has many character flaws. Winston seems to get worried over many little things, but then is blind to any big things that could truly get him in trouble. Winston, early on in the novel, worries a ton about a book that he has written and hidden in a drawer inside a desk in his apartment. Yet, Winston constantly goes out with Julia and has many sexual encounters out in the countryside where anybody could walk up and find them, or they could be picked up on any of the microphones left in the woods. And then, Winston has blind trust in O'Brien, a man who he has talked to very sparingly in his whole life, and trusts that he is going to be the one that introduces him to a whole rebellion against Big Brother. Both of these seem to, backfire on him, and ends up in Winston finally truly loving Big Brother and having the soul taken out of him. The next piece of analysis is George Orwell's 1984 as a whole, where back in the day when the book was published, many of the ideas were very ludicrous, and many people thought many of them would never come to be true. But in reality today, with many of the surveillance items and acts by the government that allow them to access your personal information, George Orwell's 1984 becomes much more realistic and an idea that could come true. This was best seen during the Soviets' reign in Russia, when basically Stalin ran his own Big Brother campaign and had his own thought police that went out and took out all his enemies, both political, personal, as anybody that could question his regime and didn't blindly follow the Soviet leadership. So basically George Orwell's 1984 was back then a warning to what could happen in the future, and well, really it's been able to happen up to this point.